Hello, David.
Hello, hi, how are you? Is the light okay?
Absolutely perfect.
Here, I can't see
Brilliant.
it. Yeah.
Thanks for joining us in Cassandra Voices Conversation. Today we speak with David Langwallner from London. Hi, David. So I shared with you the last interview to Edward Snowden conducted by Shane Smith, and I asked you for a comment on it in the light of the last development in the response of this epidemic and its consequences. What are your thoughts on it? What would you say?
Also, I think as a result of that, you also read an article I wrote in Cancel magazine of the UK on the coronavirus, which makes some similar points, but not identical points to Snowden. I mean, Snowden's concern ultimately is the effect all of this will have on what might be loosely defined as civil liberties or human rights. The Americans define these things differently. The Americans and Canadians call them civil liberties. The rest of the world calls them human rights. And Snowden's concern is about largely privacy-driven considerations, which my article in Cancel magazine indicates is only one part of the problem.
So where does this concern fit in the broader spectrum of what we are facing now, including what it seems an actual worldwide depression?
Well, I think it's a catastrophic depression. I think it's, and the only analogy is the 1929 Wall Street crash or the Weimar Republic or here is America. It's not a recession. Yeah, lives are going to be destroyed. Snowden's concern is about data protection and privacy and over-intrusive government. Of course, that is right. It is a legitimate concern, despite the fact that Facebook and Google and almost everybody else knows everything that's taken place, and they've probably recorded this conversation already. So privacy considerations are important, but I don't think they're central. And it's part of our solipsistic society. We're obsessed with our privacy and data retention, which are utterly marginal considerations. Everybody knows everything about us. Anyway, what is much more important, which Snowden does not address, but he's peculiarly American, are questions of right. Well, he does address this to some extent. Rights of liberty, movement, freedom of speech, which should be the First Amendment, intrinsic to the American character, and the basic obligations of civic society, which even on the civil and political rights will be negated by self-isolation continuing indefinitely, self-isolation becoming a paradigm of human existence from now on. And Snowden does not address at all the millions of African Americans, and in fact the millions of Americans dying in situations of poverty and social exclusion, but by not being treated by their inadequate and non-existent healthcare system, unless they have loads of money, for these facts of coronavirus. And that reaches the point, of course, that the most important human rights at one level are food, shelter, and housing, none of which he addresses.
What is also worrying, in my opinion, is that the blurred line between our virtual self and our real self is now even more blurred due to these restrictions.
I think that's a very important point, and I'm old school, and I believe the best way to get to know anybody is, in a way, to sit down and talk to them over dinner or over a conversation in a pub for several hours, or to meet them in a professional setting where you can talk to them for a considerable period of time. And once we've dehumanized social interaction, and there are all sorts of reasons to suggest this is what is going to happen, then that is incredibly dangerous. Apart from the lack of social connection, how do you know someone remotely? Now, you've met me and we've interacted on a human level, or what was a human level, what may still be a human level. But all of this is not good for the kind of species we may be evolving into. It's not progress at all.
David, let's now talk about the way different institutions are responding to this crisis, and how we all generally respond to crises of this magnitude.
People are panicking to a crisis, a legitimate crisis, an ordre public and a public emergency, the like of which has not happened in Western society since the Depression or the Second World War. I mean, you can compare the banking collapse in 2007, 2008 to this level. People are panicking in our reactive universe, or short-term attention span universe. To quote Naomi Klein, the theme we might expand upon, the shock doctrine, which Snowden references in his piece, of people are overreacting. And we have a pool or a phalanx of pseudo-experts or real experts or politicians, and everybody's putting their point of view forward. But there isn't a sense of both coordination, but more to the point, the dangers wrought by a shock or an emergency are overreaction. And that's the real problem. And a lack of forward planning and a lack of consequentialist thinking about, I mean, emergencies, leaving aside whether this one will dissipate or not, but they have a form of shelf life in a way. But the question becomes, what is the world going to be like as a consequence of this? And what is the world going to be like in legal, philosophical, and political terms for the foreseeable future? And the answer, I think, is not good. It's like the concept of the perfect storm.
Yeah, no, I do agree. I do agree with that.
And also, it's amazing when people are overreacting in a state of shock. A, they think short-term, but B, they lose sight of other things. So the news management industry, the infomercial industry of commercial news, has become consumed by this without realizing the following. One, a lot more people died in the 1918 flu epidemic, which caused more deaths in the First World War, which I put in a article in magazine. The Black Death in the Middle Ages decimated more of the population of the world than this is going to. So yes, it is an emergency. Yes, it is a crisis. But it is a kind of peculiarly hyperinflated virtual reality neoliberal world pandemonium that's taking place. And the danger in that, I don't say it's orchestrated in this context. It's not being orchestrated, I think, the way they orchestrated things in Chile or so on in the 1970s. It's not that type of level of orchestration. It's more like a confluence of interests and what you say, people not knowing what to do and too many of them and too many voices coming in. But you lose sight of the bigger picture, quite apart from the markets. And it's not just about banking collapse. They will do as Trump is trying to do in America, and they're happy doing here. They'll bail out the mega rich and big banks. But what about the small business person? Yeah. The leisure industry is now screwed. Pubs, clubs, restaurants, all forms of service-based industries. How are those people going to get sustenance and support? And what is going to happen to their business? If you look at my trade, I'm a barrister. Well, most chambers in London, except the really rich ones, are going to be under severe levels of threat, particularly those dependent on legal aid. All legal hearings are cancelled in person, and only emergency hearings held remotely in terms of shutdown. Now, the economic implications of this are stunning. Massive layoffs. There's been a huge job loss. I think 1/3 of the American workforce has gone. And of course, in America, it is not a place to be poor or marginalized. And certainly the treatment of people of color and minorities and people who are poor and underprivileged in America will not receive the requisite level of state support. support, and people will be allowed to die, a bit like the writer Celine's death on the instalment plan, or non-instalment plan in this case. So that's one aspect of the big picture in terms of that. And then moving forward economically, they're saying this is going to be embedded. There'll be pandemics to come. If there are pandemics to come, and we have social distancing / remote working as a form of a work practice that is the preferred work practice from now on, well, that will also create layers of economic collapse and or adjustment and the threat to jobs. And we have to isolate this up. Obviously, if you've got the sweetheart deal in life and you're in Norway or Sweden, the state will support you. Not if you're poor in America. And one wonders about the countries that have been really affected by the false paradigm of neoliberal austerity. Will the Germans finally stand up to the plate rather than screwing the Irish and screwing the Greeks and everybody else? Will they start? Otherwise, the European Union is under threat because they've been committed to this austerity model and the chickens have come home to roost. It's been falsified. So we are dealing with not an economic recession, but as you said to me, Daniela, a depression.
One truth is that this situation seems overwhelming from everybody, whether they are states, law society, corporations, or individuals. And it seems that the reaction are dictated by a point of references that were kind of well established before. For example, surveillance capitalism, corporate imperialism, financial speculation, up to textbook modalities of political suppression, or in the case of Hungary, democratic subversion. Now, how this textbook culture have hindered the capacity to prevent further damage in the response to this epidemic, and what's the role of our mainstream education system?
I don't like textbook people. I don't like people who have technocratic knowledge without any life experience. They're useless and they shouldn't be in decision-making position at all. And the neoliberal consensus, which has created the Brussels lunatics, and I know some of them, I mean, people have very limited ability to manipulate academic systems to get where they want. And a bit like the Robert Redford film, The Candidate, when they've got there, they go, well, I don't know what to do now, except consume lots of wine and go and have lots of pate and receptions. This is the problem. The problem is, from Christian Lagarde to Trump to Blair, who is an idiot and a neocon, to all of these people, we've created these bland, technocratic, neoliberal, neocon non-entities, and they've been responsible for all of this. The most important salient fact, what the press should be reporting, which they're not, is that the biggest glacier in the planet, in Antarctica, is on the brink, and I mean absolutely on the brink of collapse. The Denham Glacier. The effect of the collapse of that glacier will be to raise sea levels in the planet by 5 feet, perhaps. So we've got to understand the toxic time bomb, which the coronavirus is merely the symptom of, not the cause of. And a world of spin merchants and idiots, they think about message management, symptoms, and reactive responses. And they encourage us through Facebook and these ludicrous levels of instant communication to react that way. The environment is being destroyed by communicable diseases, by the destruction of the planet, and by economic meltdown. And it's all to do with toxicity and greed. It's extraordinarily interesting who becomes part of the gallery of good and the gallery of infamy. Richard Nixon, who's often portrayed as an awful human being, which he was not entirely, resisted the efforts of the American doctors to enforce private healthcare privatization. because he was in favour of the working class and the ordinary American. And he was right. They caved in to a small extent, and then they began it. The problems have become, in the healthcare system, but endemic. Managers, bureaucrats, people stopping people doing their jobs effectively, red tape, cost-benefit analysis, and under-resourcing, extra hours for less money.
Okay, so, I mean, we touched there a few points. What about human rights in this situation?
It's very problematical, actually, for all sorts of reasons. If you talk about human rights, consumption references liberty and freedom of movement, and we'll come back to freedom of speech. But much more important are the social and economic rights, which Sumption doesn't do, which are totally neglected, of food, shelter, housing. What are we going to be facing now? A world of scarcer resources where the poor, the impoverished, are going to be evicted and dispossessed, which is an American Irish phenomenon anyway, where healthcare systems, which through privatisation have been destroyed, are going to undignify deaths in public corridors, a bit like the Romanian farce, the death of Mr. Lazarescu. And so we're dealing with the negation of healthcare rights and housing rights. So when we talk about this new universe, we need to think in terms of the public-private partnership, of Keynesian intervention, of resource-driven bailouts, not for the rich. It's most notable. Trump's bailing out the bankers. The British are bailing out, as reported in The Guardian today, the banks and the top businesses. What about the small businessmen, the leisure industry, the people with no insurance, the people who rely on the public healthcare system? Now is the time to maintain in Britain and worldwide the social democratic compact they do in places like Sweden. So Sweden doesn't restrict people's movements. And one of the noticeable features is that Sweden gives people houses where they can live alone, so they don't have cramped conditions. So we're dealing with a world where we have to deal with a multitude of human rights-driven issues, balancing that against ordre public. Now, you said we'll find a vaccine. Yes, October is the nearest prognosis. But then there is the reoccurrence of coronavirus and other viruses to come, or human-invented viruses. Scientists.
Or just the effect of the depression, or just the effect of the depression that will be seen only from those months. I mean,
more people will die from mental illness, heart attacks, from stressing themselves out about this. John Gray, the English philosopher, talks about a social Darwinism, Malthusian depopulation and population code. That is kind of in the interest of neoliberalism, a form of personal dehumanization and collective dehumanization. And it's disgraceful because social Darwinism kills the weak and promotes the strong, but the strong are basically amoral sociopathic scumbags. So let us be clear about that. Let's hope at one level.
Yeah.
Boris Johnson is not an entirely irredeemable human being, has gone through a voyage of passage and comes to the position, which is mine, of Disraeli caring conservatism fused with a level of social justice and liberalism. The neoliberal model has failed. And we need to focus on human rights of dignity, healthcare, housing, shelter, liberty, freedom of speech to a point, and so on. Now, the reason I mention freedom of speech to a point is the problem of freedom of speech is who gives a task if it's on the internet or the rubbish that comes out, or manufactured Americana speech, or speech for the Ford Foundation, or these ludicrous academics in a so-called pseudo-balanced way speaking for their supper. One of the problems of freedom of speech is it legitimizes Fox News and Sky News and the nonsense of balanced coverage.
And if freedom of speech doesn't equal to acceptance of the not the complete void understanding of what's true and what's not, in the complete disregard of
yeah,
facts.
I mean, it's given true balanced coverage and relativism, and I think the structuralists, the French, are, for, I mean, a lot of reasons to blame for this. People like Derrida and Chomsky said, I agree with this entirely. He didn't understand the word the structuralist said. Derrida can contradict himself from one sentence to another. What does that mean? This has led to poser professors in America convincing soon-to-be corporate lawyers who work for Rudy Giuliani and Donald Trump to say truth is not truth. Balanced coverage. Creationism is the same thing as Darwinism. There's no smoke without fire.
No.
It's gone crazy. And so we've entered this tribalistic, nationalistic, atavistic universe where extremists are not just being given power and an audience, they're getting into positions of authority. And more to the point, which has created this whole coronavirus problem and the inability to remedially solve it, the extremists are in control. They bought into this nonsense neoliberal agenda. The Christian fundamentalists around the world have bought into it.
The question remains: so given all this, this resistance to a new way, a new deal, basically, given this resistance of a new way to open up, to open again, we restart our lives, restart our relationships with others, and all of that.
Yes, indeed.
I mean, in short, what are you think?
Well, I don't like utopian solutions. I'm an arch pragmatist. I'm a lawyer. I like to win. Solutions. The first thing a lawyer thinks of is remedies. What's going to work? If I'm offering you a service, you have to be confident in the service I'm offering you. Let us look at what we can do. What's feasible. Neoliberalism as an economic model has failed. Milton Friedman was a fraudster. We should not accept anything the law and economics movement or the Chicago School say. We should not accept any laissez-faire, unregulated free market theorists, and that creates consequences. A Keynesian New Deal of a public-private partnership, the banning of vulture capitalism or vulture funds. Vulture capitalism profits from these sort of situations. In the New Orleans hurricane, a lot of them descended, bought up the properties, and further augmented the problem. We need a level of social and civic responsibility. Now, within Britain and other social democratic countries, there is enough, I think, of political consensus to stabilise. But you do not give people bread and circuses. That means they need real support, not fake support. That means, I think, we're near the point of a universal basic income, of constant state subsidies, of an understanding that the cartelization of the world has gone too far. We have to stop and lobby for not bailing off banks or corporations. I think we've reached the point at all sorts of levels. We should not entertain, as the Americans do, corporate speech. That means the media needs to exercise a measure of responsibility. They should not report what corporate monsters say. When Michael O'Leary, the chairman of Ryanair, says there's no such thing as climate change, it's probable he should be criminally prosecuted for saying that, because he is obviously talking nonsense for his own business to create an agenda which doesn't exist. And it is irresponsible behaviour. Secondly, I think unequivocally, we need to put the environment at the forefront of everything. The Americans won't sign the Kyoto Accord. Well, that means Mr. Biden should be elected, and anybody who opposes Mr. Trump should be elected, because we need a worldwide agreement on climate change, because the fact of the matter is the coronavirus is a sideshow. If the glacier in Antarctica collapses, it'll yet be another crisis. Thirdly, and we need, rather than reactive decision-making, which Snowden talks about, we need long-term structural decision-making. And that doesn't mean just public-private partnership. It doesn't mean a strict curtailment of the rights of corporations, of the rights of law firms who are transnational. It also means, as well as that, a structural addressal of the climate change. It means influencing people, to use that awful social media expression, into responsible self-sustaining lifestyles, which involves a level of state support for universal basic income, and understanding that consumerism has gone too far, that you don't have to get the new Armani bag or whatever, that your life should be sustainable and contributory and should have a measure of public service. It means recalibrating the level of our intellectual discourse. That also means, I think, changing the way we educate people. I know that's something you're very interested in. And I think we're educating people in far too specialist and technocratic way. We are having a Habermasian salon-driven exchange here. We cannot just give people technical skills for market purposes. It's achieved a total disaster. We cannot create a mentality of social Darwinism or the survival of the fittest. It has created the dehumanized nightmare we are now facing. When we say everything's changed by the coronavirus is like a symptom of an underlying disease. It's like, multiple organ collapse.
Yeah.
One place,
this is one of them.
It happens everywhere else. And so it is because of a number of things. And you can look at this different ways. It is the toxic combination of ecocide, the destruction of the environment, and a false economic model, neoliberalism. You have the English public intellectual John Gray saying it's also about overpopulation. And he treads a very uneasy line by not endorsing but recognizing the importance of the nasty economist Malthus about a kind of form of social Darwinism. And one hesitates to put it in these terms, but in a society that has been increasingly predicated on the survival of the fittest, it is the weakest who need most our protection. But within a social Darwinist universe or a Malthusian universe, it is the population cull of the weakest by disease, poverty, social exclusion, and the inability to cope with all of this. If you're very rich, you can isolate yourself in a compound in the ocean or your country estate. If you're an emergency worker in a hospital or a duty solicitor, you have to interact with the public. And Mr. Johnson found this himself. As a public servant, he contracted coronavirus. And for a man of his age, he's the same age as me, broadly speaking. And I wouldn't quite say I've had quite the bon vivant lifestyle he has had, but I'm not known to be shy of it either. It must have been an incredible wake-up call. And he's a man of humanistic empathy at one level, and he has written some good books. And let us hope that the decent conservative mindset, the Disraeli conservative mindset, comes to the fore, because Keynesianism and the public-private partnership and a sense of collectivity and a sense of community and associate levels of obligations, which the neoliberal agenda has completely rejected, is now what is needed. And even Sumption, who is a neoliberal, effectively sees that now. And that means focus on questions of people's quality of life, not to negate personal responsibility. I think it also means that we've just got to avoid, a lot of this has been artificially induced expectations. A consumerist, Huxley's Brave New World, which I brought helpfully into the show here, a nice Folio Society edition of Aldous Huxley's Brave New World, written in the 1930s, or 1930, is about this SOMO-induced, consumerist, compliant culture that we've created. Live for today, let's all buy lots of goods we don't need, dispose of people whom we want to, let's have short-term attention spans, let's trash the environment. That has caused absolute disaster. And perhaps this wake-up call will get people to go back to living more sustainable lives. If you look at the development in economic terms between what is growth? Growth is not a desirable end in itself. It is for the enrichment of 1% of humanity. More to the point, how much do you need to live well? Why should we support or bail out very rich people who live far too well without contributing anything to humanity? And growth is depleting the resources of the planet in a finite, resource-driven universe, which is something even John Gray or the Indian philosopher Amartya Sen deal with. The question is the resources are dwindling because we've abused them and we've created a culture of rapacious greed. So we need to perhaps rethink in terms of living artisan-like or smaller levels of existences that are more sustainable for us personally, and for an understanding of the Burkean principle, Edmund Burke, of a community of souls. What I wanted to end on was the remedial solutions and the suggestion that it is now a necessity for Habermasian technical solutions with rational, salon-driven, conversational, dialogic outcomes. And that means we need people of interdisciplinary approach focusing on the coronaviruses to come, the ecological and economic depression, sustainable living structures, the endorsement of the Keynesian social partnership, the abandonment of neoliberalism, which can be politically done, the belief in Burkean, even conservative community of souls. Secondly, the also further, which also can be done, radical dealing with climate change. And if the Americans and Chinese don't get on board, just cut them out, cut them adrift as pariah nations, which is what they've become, which might engender a better electoral result in America. And so they finally do sign up to this, that this whole model, in effect, of laissez-faire unregulated capitalism, which is American creation, has failed and has become, to quote Hayek, the road to unfreedom. But thirdly, the larger human rights discourse, well, that's a real problem. Because we are living in a completely altered universe now. And as a die-in-the-wool civil libertarian, I have to accept, don't I, considerations of public safety, public health, and order publique have now to be weighed in the balance. Without compromising people's rights of liberty, movement and speech. And people have to exercise a measure of social responsibility without unlimited social distancing, which is ludicrous. And equally, that focusing, and this is a point John Gray made, that people will be much more compliant because they will want food, health, and that. All good in a way, as long as it doesn't create Aldous Huxley's SOMO-induced Brave New World, or a pliant, atomized population suitable for even greater neoliberal exploitation. There's hope, but there is real danger.
That's what we're gonna watch out.
Well, I would have said like the doomsday clock, or like the whole thing has become something out of Dr. Strangelove. Some idiot general in the Pentagon was saying, so we lose 20 million people tops, a bit like the George C. Scott figure. This whole cost-benefit economic calculus, laissez-faire economics, neoliberalism, law and economics, created by Americans, is criminal. And it's destroyed everything.
We should really think about what we would want to come back to. And that's the thing.
Self-reliance, understanding we're part of Gaia, loyalty to friendship and others, the lost art of conversation, reading books, contributing to humanity and getting a decent life out of it. What more do you want?
Let's do it again. I got your number.
Yeah, let's do something else. Yeah,
let's do it again.
I'm going to have a glass of wine now.
Enjoy. I will as well.
Take care. Bye.
Ciao.